I was condemned to death in 1994 by this regime in Iran, by this government in Iran. But that doesn't mean I want my country bombed to smithereens, and I want to have the same thing that happened in Iraq. What happened in Iraq? When it's 2003, as you said correctly, now we are 22 years after that. Iraq still doesn't have electricity, it imports from Iran. It still doesn't have proper infrastructure. So what happened to all that rebuilding? Do we want in Iran? Iran recently opened the biggest mall in the world. It has shopping centers, it has hotels. It has problems, lots of problems, I agree. But what I'm saying is we don't want the country, because what happens, if there's no military, if there is no police, all the structures collapse, what happens? Then you get
chaos
people
and the rise of radicals and extremists.
Ammunition, arms, and then you get instability, you get ISIS, you get Al-Qaeda, and the problem with Iran, you're going to have the same thing. And you asked a very correct question, that none of these regime change wars result in stability. They always result in crisis.
Well, I can't think of one. People are welcome to come up with suggestions, but I can't think of one. What were you sentenced to death for?
Sorry?
What were you sentenced to death for?
Because I was a student in London, and I was against the continuation of the Iran-Iraq war and whatever, so I got targeted. And things happened. But then, after the revolution, there was lots of hotheads in the government, there was lots of people, but it's changed. It's 47 years. And now, Iran elected a reformist president, and we want to negotiate. And the thing is, Iran has always said we want to have good relations with the West. But when, one of the things that I would like to point out is, like you pointed out earlier, if you dehumanize the other side, that's a way to get public support.
Always.
And yesterday they had the Iranian ambassador in the Foreign Affairs Committee in Parliament. I don't know if you saw it or not. It was live on Sky and BBC. And they were attacking him, and they kept calling him regime, mullahs, ayatollahs. They sort of want to make them feel like these people are not worthy,
And you describe the regime in those ways, and somehow you almost, by a sort of process of osmosis, the entire population becomes dehumanized alongside them. A word, if you would, while I have you, on the line that is coming into the studio from people who very much fit into the category we described on Monday. Everything Israel ever does will always be justified. So here's David in Wembley, talking about me, not you, John. He says, you poor man, you really have lost your mind. Iran's stated aim is the destruction of Israel. And in David's mind, that justifies everything that Israel is currently doing. I know that Ahmadinejad back in his administration talked about the necessity of wiping Israel off the map, and it is very much the line I'm hearing from people who are in favour of everything that Israel is doing to Iran. How do you deal with that?
You're a rational person. If Iran, let's say, you believe these neocons, Iran has one nuclear bomb or 10, America has 7,000, Israel has 400, Pakistan has God knows how many. Do you think even if Iran had one, it would go and hit Israel with it? It would be suicide.
I mean, to me, that seems fairly self-evident. But we talked a lot about fig leaves in the aftermath of the October the 7th attack by Hamas, and how people who are in favour of inflicting epic and utterly unjustified carnage upon either Palestinians or, in this case, Iranians, they just need a fig leaf. They need to be handed something by the sort of gatekeepers that allows them to justify their own bloodlust by saying something like, Iran wants to wipe Israel off the map. You've got no way of proving or disproving it, except, as you say, the likelihood of...
My uncle is in Iran now, in Tehran, His mother-in-law has got dementia and Parkinson's. They cannot move out of Tehran because she cannot be moved. And then you get this idiot Trump going on social media, leave Tehran. 12 million people, how are they going to leave Tehran?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't think about the human suffering of people there. And it's not like, not everybody in Iran supports the regime, but they also, they like to think we have our own government, we make our own decisions. 9 months ago, a year ago, the president's plane crashed, and I don't know, helicopter. They chose another guy, and he's a reformist guy. He's a heart surgeon. He's an educated person. He said we want to negotiate with the West. They're negotiating for. But what I wanted to say that no media reported in England. 25th of May, Kemi Badenoch goes on TV and has an interview and says this is a proxy war for Britain. Israel is fighting a proxy war for the UK. Yeah, you refer to Ahmadinejad saying that stupid thing. So why, so because Kemi Badenoch said this Israel is fighting for the UK, does that justify Iran then attacking the UK? No.
Yeah, well, I think one area in which
it doesn't justify attacking a country, does it?
Well, no. I mean, I think probably one thing on which everybody can agree is that Kemi Badenoch has never intervened in any situation and made it better. But that if you, and I've got no reason to doubt your recollection, that would be an intervention of particularly epic stupidity.
Why do we keep having this conversation about should Iran not have nuclear weapons? At the end of the day, we do, and we're the only side that's actually ever fired one. So why should the people who see themselves in affinity with those who were decimated by a lot of the things that our country has done around the world not have the kind of nuclear deterrence as you just touched on, right? I mean, we all sort of...
Well, that ties in with John's point, and I don't have the knowledge or the qualifications to comment on this, but if you portray the administration in Iran, and for my money, whether I'm right or wrong, I'm going to tell you my honest opinion, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and other and some of the Ayatollahs have very much seemed to enforce this notion that the place is a theocracy, is a crazy, corrupt theocracy where you can never say with any confidence that they won't do crazy things. So you don't want crazy people to have a nuclear weapons program. North Korea does. You could come back and point out to me, but two massive wrongs or two massive crazies don't necessarily make a right.
Yeah, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. I suppose you could also look at it from the perspective that however crazy we may perceive these people to be, they're not the ones who have been invading people around the region. They're not the people who have actually been at war through the majority of their history. We can make whatever sort of assessments that we want.
Yeah, I mean, they have proxies. They've bankrolled terror organisations. They bankroll Hamas and Hezbollah. They offer support to organisations like that, but then so does Qatar, and they get to host a World Cup. So it's not exactly a world of consistent standards, is it?
Precisely, and I think that's the point, isn't it? Is that our perspective here might be, okay, this group is a terrorist organisation, that group is, but theirs is not the same perspective, right? And they're obviously a sovereign country who has the right to make that assessment. They see these as resistance groups, which is one perspective. I mean, even if we look back in history, we could see that Nelson Mandela was considered a terrorist, and my mum remembers very well the way that he was portrayed on the
although Nelson Mandela never masterminded murderous attacks that left thousands of people dead. I mean, you're right in the terms of the politics and the rhetoric, but we have to be careful not to let our Venn diagrams get too big. So this looks to you like a repeat of various points in Western history, post-Second World War Western history, like a manufactured rationale for bringing about a regime change that will almost certainly leave the country, if it were to unfold, leave the relevant country worse off than it was before.
Yeah, I think it will leave the whole region and possibly the whole world worse off than it was before. I would say that actually even the weapons the Iranian enrichment comes in the context of Iran being very sort of heavily involved in pharmaceuticals, right? So this kind of enrichment that we see from Iran doesn't appear to actually be weapons grade enrichment. It appears to be exactly on the line that Iran has always gone down, and to ask Iran to stop that completely is basically to...
Well, that's what the last treaty did, and it was Donald Trump, of course, who tore up the last treaty. I don't have the knowledge. I think Andy in Edinburgh making the point that there wouldn't be many other reasons, or any other reasons at all, why you'd want to achieve that level of enrichment if it wasn't for a weapon. But a phone-in on why does Israel have nuclear bombs? It might be something we can do in the not-too-distant future. It's there, isn't it? That question of it's a deterrent. It makes people think twice about attacking you. So, the question of why Iran might want one, as its capital city is being evacuated, becomes relatively easy to answer, doesn't it?
It does.
We're going to attack. I mean, listen, this is mad, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to attack Iran because we claim, and we've been claiming since 1992, but please don't mention that they're about to actually achieve a nuclear capability. But, of course, the reason why we have nuclear bombs is to stop other people from attacking us.
Yeah, exactly.
Riddle me that.
And so that kind of... the question is portrayed by the answer is portrayed by the question,
Isn't
right?
it? Yeah.
Is that we are very much in that position of we want to hold all of the cards and we want to be able to attack who we want when we want, and that has been our history, right?
And that is why. And as soon as you use the word "we," some of the pieces of the jigsaw slot into place in the context of both what happened in 2003 and what John suggested from Camden is likely to happen now. If I tell you something, do you promise not to laugh at me?
Go ahead, mate.
All right, I Googled perpetual war last night because I'd kind of forgotten exactly what it meant and exactly what the rationale behind it was. And of course, I was reminded of the various dystopias in which perpetual war becomes a necessary, most obviously, I suppose, 1984 becomes a necessary tool of a regime. And then I stumbled across a piece I'd missed at the time by Simon Tisdall, who argues very, very persuasively that this is what Netanyahu needs. He needs perpetual war, not just to sort of keep the home fires burning, but also to stay out of jail. He's the Observer's foreign affairs commentator, and Trump's, in his words, Simon Tisdall's words, Trump's simplistic zero-sum world makes it easier. And maybe that's what we're looking at in some ways. And many people have suggested this morning in my texts that this was as much to do with public relations or public perceptions as it was to do with imminent threats. And because Netanyahu has essentially lost the hearts and minds of previous supporters when it comes to his actions in Gaza, he's just shifted the focus all the way to Iran and talked about nuclear bombs and historic threats to wipe Israel off the map, and started bombing TV studios and residential areas and nuclear capabilities and taking out senior members of the administration. And he will get the support of, quotes, the West again, end quotes, just as it was beginning to teeter in the context of Gaza. Perpetual war. And of course, the question of whether Israel ever intended to honour the ceasefire in the first place, that it broke most recently, is pretty close to rhetorical.
I'm an Iranian. I lived in Iran until 14 years old and then moved to Dubai with my family. At 18, I moved to UK, studied, got my doctorate. Now I have a very successful tech company. And I believe, I'll just give you a background of myself. I'm Iranian and I traveled around. I believe this war could bring stability to the Middle East as Iranians, nation, and Israeli be friends and policing in the Middle East, so there is no more extremist in Middle East. That's what I believe, and I don't know. I might be very naive to think this way, but considering Iranians are not Arabs, considering most Iranians now are against the regime and in favor of regime change.
Can you think of an example from history of a country being bombed into stability?
But there are currently, as far as the news which I perceive from Iran, is that they are, bombing locations which are not all of them residentials. So majority of them, they're targeting their army leaders or people like the mullahs, basically, not civilians.
Well, they've called for an evacuation of Tehran.
Yes, because that's what I believe. They want to take over Tehran, and taking over Tehran with Israeli armies or with Americans, that could, gain power somehow and have the regime change.
Which brings me back to my original question. And just because we may not be able to think of one doesn't mean that the next one won't work. But can we think of examples from history, particularly in the Middle East, of regimes being bombed into stability?
Again, it's not being...
can we think of a war can we think of a war in the Middle East that has increased stability in the region?
I don't know. I have to look at the history. I don't know much about that. But this one could be different.
It could.
Considering, again, Iranians, they have different culture, different language. And I love Arabs, by the way. Just have lived with them. I have lots of friends, and there's nothing against them. But I'm just saying we are different. We have, when we were back in the school in Iran, we studied... we didn't even study that much of Arabic. When we were reading Quran, it was in Arabic, and we didn't know what we were saying, what we were reading. And we didn't get that, attached to the words we were reading. And most of my friends, anybody I know around me, they have denounced their religion, and they don't want to be part of it. What we see in the TV,
Okay, so I'll ask you a question that I asked when in the early days of the attacks on Gaza. If we take your desire for regime change and your belief that it would bring stability, what would be a rough figure for the number of Iranians that you're prepared to see die in order to bring about what you desire?
So I have no desire for anyone to die. No one.
But it's not going to happen unless it's not going to happen unless they do. So what would be a rough estimate of what would be either acceptable or unacceptable to you? I can't comment on that. You kind of have to, I think. I mean, I'm not going to force you to, but I don't think you can be in favour of regime change without acknowledging that it will involve a lot of death of Iranians, of your fellow Iranians.
Yes, absolutely. I want them to be protected. I want them to be safe. But the Iranians regime has been killing them. They've been killing the Iranians. It's to millions, probably, if you want to go back since the regime change.
And that's why you come back. That's when we come back to the question of when regime change in these kind of contexts has actually brought about stability. Syria might actually answer your question, but of course that wasn't regime change that was imposed from outside. That was achieved from within. When Western powers or the allies of Western powers have gone into places and brought about regime change through force and through killing the people that live there, I'm not sure either of us can come up with an example of things going well.
Syria, we should not forget it's been in war for many years, and they weakened Assad regime before this happened. So it is kind of they've been in war. It's not like just one day and change. They have changed the regime.
No, well, I know, except it wasn't imposed from the outside. It was achieved. It was achieved from within, which would be desirable in Iran. Well, we do know, and we also know that the bloke currently in charge used to be in ISIS. So some of the sort of lazy distinctions and observations get blown to pieces when you look at the Syrian example. But I find myself wondering quite where we would point in order to support the notion that this could be good for Iran. What example, what precedent we would cite. And I suppose you're perfectly entitled to say, well, I haven't got one, but it doesn't mean this won't work.